Hello, today a how-to on dogma busting with one simple tool. And some precision razor blades for those of you who prefer them. Listen in and you'll be able to debunk everything from curiosity-killing insults to pseudoscientific marketing speak to shaky theories of human nature. A heads up, it might start off sounding technical, it is technical, but I can assure you this episode will save you a stack of cash that might otherwise have been spent on bullshit backed by unreason. This is the mini episode that you may or may not have been waiting for. And it's not mini. I've realised that when you coin a term, it does take more than 10 minutes to lay it out. A lot more, so I am doing chapters and timestamps today for your convenience. This episode is about the faux terminus, which you met last episode. It is a term I came up with when researching the rhetorical devices used to shut down inquiry. Now, in classical fallacy theory, errors of logic are classified by structure. The faux terminus, however, looks at function, and its function is to shut down inquiry. It is a performance of finality when curiosity is actually still warranted. The faux terminus is thus beloved among politicians, Western spiritualists, self-improvement gurus, and even some psychologists, as we saw last week. They love it without even knowing it, because the term is being introduced now. You, dear listeners, will hopefully find it useful because focusing on function makes it way easier to recognise potential dogma. And as opposed to relying on structural definitions, you won't have to remember a stack of Latin names for stuff. Now, if you've somehow stumbled across this at random and without watching episode 14, that's all good. You're welcome here. I'm Jordan Rain, a philosophy graduate from New Zealand who is allergic to self-help gurus. And this is The Loneliness Industry, a philosophy podcast about how capitalism's values, structures and processes divide us from each other, and, more specifically for today's not mini episode, how they divide us from reason itself. This is a supplement episode I promised in episode 14 for those of you who regularly watch, and it is all about recognising when someone is not remotely interested in connection or discussion, when they are, instead, trying to perform some final word that isn't one, often to make themselves look clever, cool, or just more in the right than you are. Now, all the rhetorical manoeuvres you will meet today are faux termini, but we are going to look at the subtypes, those already named by philosophers and authors and so on. Why? Because when pseudo-spiritualists want to blind you with bullshit, or so-called experts posture instead of proving, you'll know exactly what they are playing at. And hurrah, hurrah, we get to meet Jordan Peterson and Joe Dispenza once again, delving into the nuts and bolts of their bad arguments, along with an additional crap argument case study on a famous psychologist who shall remain nameless, but who claims that human nature is inherently misanthropic. This episode is not for the faint of heart, especially if Latin words give you flashbacks to that Caligula film you were accidentally exposed to as a child. And I know it really won't be for everyone because this is kind of hardcore theory development. So have no fear, we will get back to the more general stuff on where dogma abounds in order to try and sell you stuff next episode. But as a quick recap, the context of this episode and the one prior to and following it is dogma. The faux terminus is the telltale sign that dogma is likely incoming, because dogma is made possible by shutting down questioning. Now, episode 14 was about the link between dogma and what Karl Jaspers called unreason. For Jaspers, curiosity and inquiry are vital parts of reason. So when curiosity and inquiry are shut down, reason has also left the building. Unreason operates as a performance, a non-curious kind of engagement that feels like a dick-swinging contest that only mimics thought. It employs the two devices that we're going to be looking at today. The faux terminus, and its even more evil twin, the faux terminus paralogism. Both are curiosity killers with no interest in cats. They kill inquiry instead, sometimes politely, with poise and good manners, and sometimes with F-bombs and offensive words about your mum. And why is curiosity important? Firstly, because it's the key ingredient in connecting and wanting to know and understand each other. Second, because beyond helping us understand each other, it is crucial for understanding the world. Without curiosity, it isn't just relationships that fail. Even science chokes and stalls, as Thomas Kuhn showed us last episode. Karl Jaspers explains that curiosity is what binds reason to knowledge, making knowledge the growing, deepening, recontextualizing thing that it is. And when curiosity is shut down, reason is shut down. And that is when knowledge ossifies into dogma, and is the point where you meet the peddlers of thought control, toxic positivity, and psychologists who try and force you to be racist, aka Jordan Peterson. It was thanks to him, Dispenza, and a few other annoying characters that we met the Faux Terminus last time, and I promised to go into more detail, because when dogma is at play, faux termini abound in support of power games, one-upmanship, along with dick-swinging contests about who has heard of Phantom Mass or can name the recording studio that Neurosis used for their second album. In short, faux termini show us that unreason is in action, so recognising them is a great way to protect yourself from conversations with dickheads. Meaning non-conversations that are really about establishing hierarchy or dividing us into in-groups and out-groups, and are not about connecting. As mentioned, the faux terminus is called a faux terminus because of its function. When a rhetorical move aims to shut out remaining questions and end the argument, it is a faux terminus. It is an ending that should not be one because that further questioning is actually totally legitimate. That's how it gets its name. It is not a definitive answer or conclusion, but it pretends to be one. It's performed like one. Now, if you didn't watch episode 14, that's okay. You'll still recognise an example from your own childhood. When you whined your best frustrated, scrunch-faced whine, saying, "But why can't I stay up and play Tetris for 6 more hours?" And your equally frustrated, exhausted parent replied, "Because I said so. That's why." Obviously, question time is over, though the question itself was legitimate. You might even consider this childhood example the stone tool ancestor of all faux termini. Blunt, effective, and perfect for bashing curiosity to death. Ye old parental, "because I said so," is an example of what is known as the appeal to authority. Or, if you like Latin, in a Kiwi accent, argumentum ad vicundium. Oh, and by the way, there are subtitles for the accent impaired, for those of you who constantly complain about my accent. With appeals to authority, we claim something is true because some higher status entity said so. In this case, the parent is claiming their own parental authority, and the person or role becomes a source of truth. Being a parent makes you right in this case. This kind of faux terminus shuts you down by demanding deference to power or rank. But there are many other kinds of faux terminus, and that is why this episode is going to be so long. Each one has its own structure, with its own particular name, and these came out of classical fallacy theory, which focuses on structure. And as you might already see, just recognising it as a faux terminus at all is usually enough to disarm unreason. And it's easier than memorising a stack of Latin names. And this is why I'm putting the term out there. Even so, because some of you are curious, for which I applaud you, we are going to go through these different structures today before getting to various famous people and case studies about their terrible arguments. In any case, these structures were already defined by previous philosophers and other authors over time. But think of it like this, okay? The faux terminus is the genus, and the particular types of faux termini with their various structures and names, they're the species. Things belong to the genus Faux Terminus because of their function, and that function is shutting down inquiry. The species of Faux Terminus are all about how inquiry is shut down and are defined by structure. A tasteless analogy for you. Murder has the function of unaliving someone. Strangulation, stabbing, or locking someone in a room with Joe Dispenza's audiobook on repeat play are all about how that murder happened. Sometimes it's enough to know it was a murder. Other times we're a bit more mesmerised by the horror of the crime scene. Now, from unquestioned authority to power games, I want to talk here about the performative aspect of dogmatism, even when we're looking at structure. Now, childhood examples are easy to spot because you have an authority figure who doesn't even need to try to win a power game. When someone already holds power, they don't really have to build a convincing argument. They can simply perform bare bones authority. And that's why established dogma can sound so barefaced, like it is so because God willed it, or it's a law of nature. This kind of lazy performance has the advantage that it lets the function shine through. It's conversation stopping, not truth-seeking. Neither makes an actual argument, they just declare. Now, such no-frills performances of a shutdown move are not much of an issue for tired parents denying their child a game of Tetris. But if some authority in your world feels so secure in their power over you that they perform appeals to authority as lazy as, "'cause I'm your boss," you could be dealing with someone who sees you as a pawn they can shuffle about in their lifelong chess game. So run. But once power has to justify itself in politics, institutions, or dick-swinging contests about who is the coolest, dogmatism evolves new costumes. It becomes performatively logical rather than performatively ugh. And you'll hear things like, science has already proven that, when it hasn't, or history shows us that people like you always fail, or if you question this, you're part of the problem. Or a favourite among defenders of capitalist ideology, the market has spoken. In such context, where it's all about power, but that power has not yet been established, we start to dress up arguments more cleverly. Now, some of the above are still appeals to authority or tradition, but done a tad more convincingly. In other words, there are performative levels of faux termini, each telling us something about power, dogma, and how convincingly unreason can masquerade as logic. "Stop talking shit and drink your beer, science boy," is obviously not a very stylish faux terminus, even though it is one. But take this one from the world of Western spiritualism. "If you find this hard to accept, then it's another sign you're not in alignment." Now the second one sounds like insight. At least millions of Enlightenment course punters find it persuasive, and if you don't, I'm glad, but it is wearing much shinier garb than "stop talking shit, science boy." And at the very top level of faux termini, the ones performed with serious elegance, none of us are entirely immune. The slickest of faux termini are the ones that Immanuel Kant would name paralogisms. These are arguments that look logically sound, whilst quietly not being. Now, Jordan Peterson's argument in defense of IQ test, which we dissected last time, is one example. Arguably, we'll get to that. And so are Joe Dispenza's, physics plus spirituality hybrids. So, borrowing from Kant, I'm giving these especially polished faux termini their very own label, the Faux Terminus Paralogism. And these are like the Ferraris of faux termini. They're expensive looking, over-engineered, and almost always driven by men who are trying to compensate for something. Now, as I said, Jordan Peterson's argument was arguably a faux terminus paralogism. As we shall see, what counts as illogical looking does vary, and sometimes greatly. For some people, just shouting, "Facts don't care about your feelings," already sounds like reason, even when that's just a tantrum in a lab coat. My focus here is on performance and function. So when I put these species of faux terminus into categories here, it's a bit more flexible than when one focuses, as philosophers traditionally do, on structure. Now that was a lot, wasn't it? So if you're still here, respect. Most people do not delve into logic of their own free will in their spare time, so respect. This is a recap on what we've done so far. Faux termini are defined by function and not structure. Their function is to stop legitimate inquiry. Each kind of faux terminus will use a different structure to do that job. Things like appeals to authority, non sequitur, red herrings, and so on. And the special evil twin, the faux terminus paralogism, is the subset of faux termini whose structure mimics logic itself. This is the one that is executed with such finesse that it does have the illusion of reasoning. Now, next up, a quick taxonomy of common structures grouped by their potential for performative slickness. Now, if you want to jump to the case studies on Joe Dispenza, an unnamed psychologist, and their respective paralogisms, the timestamp should be in the show notes or on screen for YouTube. But if you do skip, you will miss an amusing surprise about Jordan Peterson and my carefully constructed sweary examples for all of the structures. So for those of you who wish to stay with me, we're about to enter the twisted menagerie of faux termini, designed for your convenience in recognizing dickheads in a more specific fashion, or even to use yourself for those special occasions when someone is performing instead of really conversing and you just can't be asked. Fasten your seatbelts as we enter the theme park of unreason, complete with Latin signage, circular logic rides, and a gift shop selling fake full stops. And just so you know, you're going to be tested on this at the end. Kidding. What is cool about the faux terminus is that it means you don't have to remember all these Latin names unless you so choose. All the things we mention here are subtypes, the species within the broader genus of faux terminus. These are like the named moves that you can call on to kill the conversational dance. They're like different official flourishes which will always culminate in voila, performance over, nothing more to see here, meaning a faux terminus. So, a quick note for those of you whose favourite hobby is objecting to things. Formally, so that means in a formal sense, philosophers of logic group fallacies by structure, like formal versus informal, and by intent, relevance, presumption, ambiguity. I am arranging things differently here, deliberately, by level of sophistication, or in other words, how much effort and style the move involves. The boundaries here are fuzzy, because this is phenomenology, not pure logic, meaning both the listener's perception and the speaker's performance play a role. Now, if you happen to find straw men more convincing than tautologies, you might rank these moves differently. And the performer's ability also comes into play as well. You'll see through the course of this that the same move can be done crassly and clumsily, or executed with a great deal more style. I'm calling these the crude and the personal. These are school disco bully faux termini. We're starting with what I have decided is the shallow end, the crude, obvious, and almost always nasty faux termini. These moves don't look much like logic. They're more like the angry outbursts of a bullying teenager as they struggle to do the sidestep in a school disco. I mean, let's face it, ad hominem even sounds like a side branch of human evolution that died out from sheer thuggishness. For this section, we welcome to the dance floor the ad hominem, the tu quoque, the what about X defense, and the mocking dismissal. When those who use these things are actually too old for school discos, these faux termini become more like the conversational equivalent of a pub fight. Offensive, pointless, and something you don't want on your record. Let's start with the ad hominem argument, which attacks the person, not the point they're making. This is like when you say, what do you think, Bob? Is this craft beer only popular because it's pitched as boutique and elite? Because I find it kind of flat. And Bob fires back, you wouldn't know if a tyre was flat. That's the ad hominem in action. No engagement with the point, just a drive-by insult so you'll shut up and get on with drinking. To my earlier heads up though, even though ad hominem arguments are usually unsophisticated, they can be dressed up a little. You'll know this if you've ever tried telling your boss that you've been given way more work than you could possibly complete in the allotted time, and you got this reply. You're obviously not a team player. This line is still the teenager two-step in structure, the same brawly shift in focus from what you said to you being the problem. So the structure is a shift in focus from the point itself to you, and the function, well, it's the faux terminus, so its function is always conversational shutdown. Next up, the tu quoque defense. Have you ever chatted with a friend and raised concerns that your neighbours constantly have screaming fights where kids start crying and pot plants are shattered on walls? If you have, and your friend is a dickhead, you may have been met with, yeah, but you argue with your spouse too. If you have, then you've met the tu quoque, which is not the follow-up book to Don Quixote. It is an argument that dodges the issue by accusing you of hypocrisy. It says, you don't have the right to make that point if you're even remotely entangled with anything similar. Now, I get one of these regularly, This is people commenting, you hate capitalism's core values, but you still want people to support you, like financially. Meaning you critique capitalism, yet you participate in it. The tu quoque sounds convincing because it borrows the moral posture of consistency. You can't say X if you also do Y. But logically, it's irrelevant. Whether you live up to your own principles or not has no bearing on whether the principle itself is true. Like if a chain smoker tells you that smoking causes cancer, they're still right. The truth of the statements doesn't depend on the purity of the person saying it. And just FYI to those commenters, nobody opts out of capitalism like it's a Netflix subscription. We have to survive in it, and if not, we'll end up homeless, which and still a part of capitalism because we'll need to beg for money. All that is why it's not a real argument. It doesn't address what's being said. It just goes after the person who's saying it. It replaces engagement with the claim itself with a moral audit of the speaker. And that swap is the sleight of hand. It confuses hypocrisy with error, as if being inconsistent automatically makes you wrong. Now, next up, we have whataboutism. Now, this one's another redirect, but instead of redirecting to you being the problem, it redirects to other problems. It says, the issue you're talking about doesn't count because somewhere else something worse is happening. Imagine if Moana, in rural New Zealand, complains that a company is dumping untreated excrement into a river that runs past her house. And someone from the company replies, "What about China? The pollution there is astronomical. You should be more concerned with that." The tactic here is deflect, distract, and declare moral immunity through comparison, which of course does not address Moana's legitimate issue. Now you find this kind of faux terminus a lot, or variants on it, in self-improvement culture. You say you're burned out and need rest? What about all the single mums working 3 jobs and still finding time to work out in the gym every morning? Again, the same dismissal of the problem at hand, coupled with you being told you have no right to say anything. This is not an argument. It is a distraction technique. Next up, short and sweet, HBO presents the mocking dismissal. You know nothing, Jon Snow. Which happens to be way cooler and more efficient than stop talking shit, science boy. Even if it has the same structure. And that's because HBO have better scriptwriters than me. A mocking dismissal uses ridicule instead of refuting an argument. And it is the last of our schoolyard faux termini. And I do not encourage you to go out and practice these with your friends. Now, our next set of non-arguments is not necessarily more sophisticated than the school disco, but they tend to be less personal. Here we see the kind of moves one does when desperately concentrating on following a pattern. So this section is kind of like line dancing. It's all about adherence to established procedure all the time, just like your parents and grandparents and great-great-grandparents did. We begin with the appeal to tradition argument. Mum, why do we always ask the higher power to give us bread when everyone in the family has a gluten allergy? Because that's what we've always done, dear. Obviously there is no good reason for doing this, and some very good ones not to, such as saving on toilet paper costs. And in case you think that kind of logic only lives in isolated towns and church basements, here's one from last week in a German hospital. Doc, why do you prescribe proton pump inhibitors for acid reflux without first testing whether the patient actually has high stomach acid, given that the same symptoms can arise from either low or high stomach acid? I got this reply, because that's what we always do. Yes, this was from a so-called doctor, and it just so happens that this conversation went on to include live specimens of our next 2 argument types, because when tradition starts to look stupid, appeals to authority, also known as ad verecundiam arguments, often rush in to hold its quaking hands. Me. But isn't it dangerous to do that, given that a lot of people, like me, have very low stomach acid production, and protein pump inhibitors will lower it even further, creating more fermentation, and so on? Here it comes. Wait for it. Look, I'm the doctor here. And we meet the appeal to authority a second time, in its proper section. The appeal to authority thing isn't just typical of overtired parents or doctors in Germany either. It is typical of how dogma evolves under pressure, when "we've always done things this way" fails to persuade. The next fallback is status, another way for unreason to preserve itself. And Dr. Frankenscheiser went on to add the following stomp in his line dance with this comment: "And you certainly won't find anyone here who thinks that," meaning my comment on low stomach acid. This man could not manoeuvre out of his line dance level moves. And that last one is known as the majority mirage argument, or the ad populum argument if you like Latin. It doesn't even assert truth directly. Instead, it actually implies that the truth is irrelevant if no one else agrees. And incidentally, this one also illustrates perfectly how unreason can really feed into loneliness, because it essentially uses social isolation as epistemic proof. If your view is not shared by enough people, it must be wrong. It weaponizes belonging too, by implying that your being in a minority, an outgroup, makes you laughable. Of course, he was laughing on the other side of his face when I shouted, "That's an ad populum argument, dickhead." Not really. Because Germans don't laugh, at least not the ones who have failed to study medicine. Instead, he promptly put me in the crazy menopausal foreigner file where he keeps everyone with an accent, a vagina, or questions he can't answer. Anyway, let's move on to a classic that's used by those who've somehow, despite growing up in a barn dance, managed to rise higher than your village doctor. Now this one might be a surprise, so please write in the comments if the appearance of this particular character in this particular category is shocking for you. We met him last episode and he delivered us a wonderful example of the false choice argument. Yes, Jordan Peterson. But he isn't alone in being lo-fi. You hear this one loads in politics, where any disagreement with someone in power triggers the whole "you're either with us or against us" thing. Now, Peterson is a little more slick than that, which is a good illustration of the fact that any of these structures can actually be wielded more convincingly or less. Peterson's false choice argument was as follows: you either accept that IQ tests are valid, or you throw out the whole of psychology. Now, as with the politician, he makes it look like those are the only two options. You can either fund the welfare state or the military. The false choice argument is just that, reducing what are actually complex issues into black and white type choices. And for the record, other options do exist, like throwing Jordan Peterson out of psychology, or admitting that IQ tests are flawed and keeping some of psychology, though, really, I wouldn't have had much issue with opting for the second thing, given what the DSM and CBT have done for society, or rather done to society. Now, as I mentioned last episode, Peterson uses this false choice in a sort of hostage manner. He doesn't think anyone would choose option B, so there's this implied version of the next kind of argument in his statement too, that anyone who would choose to throw out psychology is an idiot. Now, this is called the emotional hijack, and it replaces reasoning with pressure. In this case, the pressure not to look like an idiot, because who wants to be the fool that throws out the whole of psychology? And that's how these arguments work. They weaponize belonging, shame, and fear of ridicule to keep the dance going, and in-group, out-group stuff happening. Divide and conquer. Old hat. But when the social pressure won't suffice, the next step in the sequence is the process shield. Now, this is the kind of faux terminus where the speaker retreats behind the machinery of the system itself, and you hear things like, "That's just how science works," or "These are the established methods," which really means I'm not prepared to question the process, and nor should you be. It's the rhetorical equivalent of hitting autopilot and insisting the plane is still being flown. Full disclosure here, it surprised me too that Jordan Peterson ended up in the line dance category. I hadn't actually grouped the argument types by performative level when I did the last episode, and I just kind of assumed that Peterson belonged in the more convincing category, one that would earn him the title of Faux Terminus Paralogism. But alas, Peterson's logic is a lot less sophisticated than I thought at first glance, even if I knew it was a faux terminus. And that illustrates a couple of points too. Firstly, that recognizing a faux terminus can be way easier than categorizing arguments from specific structures. Second, it helps to see why what gets called a paralogism is contestable. Clearly, for some of us, the false dilemma, majority mirage, and appeal to emotion combo looks logical-ish when I'm not paying enough attention. Last of all in this section, my very least favourite, tautologies. I dislike these things so much, and this is a true story. I introduced a tautology jar into a flat I once lived in. And if someone ever used a tautology, they had to put a pound coin in it as penance for the Christmas fund. If they did a very clever one, though, which nobody noticed, they could take a pound coin back out, all pointing to the fact that even with one particular move, performance level varies. Here is the tautology that contributed by far the most funds to our end-of-year Christmas party. It is what it is. No shit, Sherlock. Things are definitionally equivalent to themselves. Murder is what it is, and saying so tells me nothing about whether you think it's okay, terrible, or circumstantially justified. And that's the whole point. There is no information in a tautology. They are not arguments. They are statements that are automatically true by definition and don't even engage with the issues at hand. So you're literally just throwing a true thing at someone and saying, there you are, discussion over. Like shutting down a conversation with the sentence, cats exist. So before I get more angry about tautologies, the next section is kind of like freestyle dancing failures. Now, this group is, at least potentially, a little more stylish than the line dance, and that metaphorically speaking, they're like attempts to step outside the line dance pattern or the two-step schoolyard meanness. Now, we covered the non sequitur last episode. Like the tautology, it can involve statements that are true, but don't actually follow logically from the premises or don't have much to do with the point at hand. It's like trying to invent your own dance move only to fall on your ass. For example, you do an episode about how loneliness is structural and someone comments, but in 1878 Nietzsche said XYZ. And the statement could well be true, but its relevance to the argument remains mysterious at best. They too could just as easily have said, cats exist, therefore I'm right. The point is that just because a statement is true doesn't make it a conclusion to any discussion in the world. Now, a non sequitur is an attempt to pull you into a tangent that feels connected, but actually isn't. Nietzsche is a philosopher. This is a philosophy podcast, and I think that was the gambit, but, it actually wasn't connected in any manner that I could tell. And for this reason, the non sequitur can appear similar to the next move that we're going to talk about, and that is called the red herring. And the difference is that the non sequitur, it kind of breaks the logic, while a red herring just totally changes the subject. So on from non sequiturs to fishy comments. Another live example from those who love to hate. Again, on an episode about competition driving loneliness this time, someone wrote, "So, you hate hard work then?" A sudden pirouette directly away from the point. And that is a red herring. It reframed the whole conversation around moral character instead of social structure. And suddenly we're not talking about capitalism producing loneliness anymore, we're defending our work ethic. And this is kind of the equivalent of suddenly throwing a moonwalk into a line dance. It's not a logical error so much as a total diversion tactic. As is the next one, the straw man argument. As made famous by manipulators and high-end bullies who know the two-step is too obvious and instead decide to gaslight you about which dance is even going on. More clearly, the straw man argument works by building a sort of proxy statement to stand in for what someone actually said. Here's an example. Let's say Charlie comments that dogs are wonderful because they're loyal, loving and warm. And if Carl wanted to shut Charlie down, as only a psychopath or a cat person would want to, he'd simply rearrange what Charlie said so that he could make them feel small. And let's not forget that is what all of these tactics are about. For example, Carl could say, "So, you're saying human beings aren't capable of offering authentic love? I'm really hurt by that, and to be honest, it sounds like a projection of your own inability to love." Now, Charlie never said a damn thing about human beings being able to love them. Carl is making little stories up for himself, and not because he failed his listening test at school. He invented a stand-in, a straw man, deliberately so that he could tear it down. Now, if you recognise such moves, my commiserations, seriously. I feel your pain, because that is not an invented example. So let the straw man argument be a reminder of why recognising faux termini is so crucial. It stops you wasting your time with psychopaths and cat lovers. I'm kidding about cat lovers, you're fine. Now we get to the dance move made popular and profitable by Western spiritualism. Circular reasoning, or begging the question, or, if you like Latin, petitio principii, I think. This is the not-so-distant relative of tautologies, but slightly more stylish. Think of it as a tautology that, instead of going in a line, goes in a circle. So more innovative, but still a logical fallacy. Circular arguments assume the thing they're trying to prove. And this is where we finally move into some of the stuff we love to hate on this channel, because Western spiritualism is not only awesome at these, it has monetized them. Take, for example, the following classic. The fact that you have issues with this proves that you're not in alignment. In New Age self-help rhetoric, alignment is a reified synonym for agreement or attunement to a supposed higher truth, usually the speaker's model of reality, energy, or vibration. So this creates a self-sealing system. Any dissent automatically confirms the speaker's framework. The logic assumes that alignment is real, definable, and measurable by agreement. But that's precisely the thing it's meant to be arguing for, not assuming from the start. Like so much faux spiritualist crap, as we discussed in episode 10, this happens to be a remix of neoliberalism, the one we've all heard since birth. If you try hard enough, you'll succeed. Which of course gets used to tell you if you didn't succeed, then you didn't try hard enough. Nothing to do with structural violence, racism, sexism, or the fact that you only have one leg, just a lack of hustle. The circle both explains and justifies itself, whilst erasing external factors like inequality, luck, exploitation, structural barriers, and so on. This isn't just circular logic. It's capitalism's favourite bedtime story. It loops endlessly. Success proves virtue, virtue proves success, until you collapse from exhaustion believing it's all your fault. I get angry at the end of each of these sections, don't I? On to the next section. The sophisticated and the cunning. We now get to the academic faux termini. So, on the coattails of the monetized moves of Western spiritualism, we get to the level where paralogisms mostly live. And this is the high-rent district of bullshit, the penthouse ballet studio of unreason, where dogma pirouettes in front of mirrors and quotes itself. And I say paralogisms mostly live here, because don't forget, a paralogism, as Kant defined it, isn't one particular argument type. Whether something counts as a paralogism depends on who's watching, and how well it's executed or disguised. As we saw with Jordan Peterson, any kind of faux terminus might be a paralogism, even if it lives in a shack, so long as the speaker puts a convincing enough tutu on it. At this level, the structures, they can take a century to unpack, and then, as this is a mini episode, I'm opting for 2 case studies, starring 2 well-known Ferrari drivers desperately trying to compensate for something. 2 real-world examples from the land of utter claptrap. Joe Dispenza returns to the stage, along with a certain well-known psychologist whose theory of the human condition makes the claim that deep down, we all want to be as far away from each other as possible. By the end, it'll be clear why both classify as a faux terminus paralogism, assuming you think they look logical at all. Just quickly though, the names and functions of the moves and manoeuvres at this level, and not in depth before we get to the case studies, we have the misfiled concept. This is a category error. So taking an idea that belongs to one domain and forcing it into another so that the analysis misses the target. An example would be something like loneliness is a choice, which treats a structural social condition as a personal preference, so wrong category. Then we have the ideological machine. This is called the systematic paralogism. A whole worldview built from self-reinforcing bad logic where every part props up the others so that it looks airtight from the inside. An example here would be things like real patriots never question the government, or a better one, women don't date you because you're not in your masculine. And the latter of which we get from the intersection of heteronormativity, the reduction of complex emotional dynamics into caricatures, and the neoliberal habit of turning every form of suffering into a personal performance issue. Next, we have the scientific paralogism, otherwise known as the pseudoscientific paralogism. This is where you borrow sciencey words to sound proven, while skipping actual method, evidence, or falsifiability. An example would be things like, quantum frequencies prove abundance. We're going into Joe Dispenza very soon. Lastly, the academic gaslight, otherwise known as the epistemic paralogism. This is where you use the vocabulary of philosophy or knowledge-making to prevent questioning. So it's gatekeeping disguised as rigor. An example would be something like, that's not rigorous enough to question. And taken together, these paralogisms show how unreason can maintain the grammar of reason. They differ in method because some scientize belief, some weaponize philosophy itself, but all do the same structural work. They stabilize fragile ideas by simulating coherence. And the paralogism doesn't destroy logic outright. It kind of inhabits it, like maintaining its form whilst emptying out its substance. And that is what makes it so insidious. It blurs the boundary between sense and nonsense. And to make that tangible, we're now going to meet our two living examples. Both borrow the tone and aesthetics of reasoning, one from science, one from psychology, and both use them to perform certainty. Now, case study 1 is the Faux Terminus of Joe Dispenza. A man who gets far too much airtime here, considering how inane I find him. Now, this case study shows what happens when the language of quantum physics and neuroscience is monetized and repackaged into fashionable promises. It's what you get when facts from fields of enormous complexity and mathematical rigor are decontextualized into a kind of creed. One built on beliefs like shifting your frequency or collapsing your quantum field will help you redesign your life, body, and future. This is the territory of the scientific paralogism, claims dressed up as science with all the gloss of empirical rigor and none of the grounding. When you encounter phrases like quantum entanglement of consciousness or mind-matter coherence in a self-help context, you're watching the mechanics of a paralogism in full flow, pseudoscience mimicking the real thing. Now here is a quote taken from Unlimited Joe Dispenza. The link will be in the blog if you want it. It is a textbook case of what I mean by a paralogism dressed up as science. Hold on to your hats, or rather your lunch. And I quote, "While the body as matter is the vehicle which enables us to operate in this 3D realm, there is a greater part of ourselves that is connected to a field of information beyond this realm. In this quantum realm, there is no separation and everything material is interconnected in oneness. Back here on Earth, our senses fool us into believing events are separate. In order to create from this unknown field, we have to dissociate from everything that is known, become no body, no one, no thing, nowhere, and no time. For it is in this place that we become pure consciousness." Now, at first glance, it might sound coherent, and for some, even profound. And, I'm sorry to burst your bubble if that's the case, but let's look closely at the structure. Premise 1. In the quantum realm, everything is interconnected. Now this is a speculative gloss on physics, and not fully established in this sense. Premise 2. Our senses give us an appearance of separation. Now this is a Kantian-style claim about intuition and appearance, so, there's some grounding at least, but here is where we face a leap. Therefore, we should dissociate from embodiment, no body, no one, no thing, to access pure consciousness and create reality. Now, the crack is in the therefore. The premises are ontological, meaning they're about what exists and what reality is made of. while the conclusion is psychological. It's about how humans should think or behave. So the therefore, it crosses categories without warrant. So this is a category error wrapped up in a scientific paralogism. Physics-sounding vocab is used to license a behavioural ought. Hopefully that makes sense. Now, if it doesn't, it's going to be on the blog on thelonelinessindustry.net, but those of you who are following, now you know. And instead of having to yell, "What total bullshit," which is a low-level faux terminus itself, even if it's true, you may instead cry out faux terminus paralogism or categorical error with a scientific paralogism. This is not guaranteed to win you friends at parties, but it might confuse anyone talking about it into silence. The sad part is, because it's dogma, Joe himself is unlikely to give a shit. But let his accusations of low vibrations glance off your newfound bullshit naming shield and wound him in the sales figures. This next case study is probably a little easier to follow, from the psychologist of overreach. Now I'm choosing to keep this person nameless, though some of you will recognise the argument. I'm going to call him Dr. Solo. Now this case study is about how unreason dresses itself as data in an effort to look empirical. Now it too shows us how the label paralogism is somewhat subjective, because some of you actually called this one out as unreason straight away, meaning it failed to disguise itself successfully. Dr. Solo's argument was as follows. At their core, human beings want to be as far away from one another as possible, and Solo professed that he could prove this. Now his proof was a single post-COVID survey where the majority of people stated that they did not want to return to work because of their colleagues. Now that feels empirical. Well, to him at least. A spoiler, it's not. Let's look at the argument first, and then the unspoken leaps. Dr. Solo's argument was this. Premise 1. In a post-COVID survey, a majority of respondents said they did not want to return to the office because of their colleagues. Conclusion. Therefore, human nature is fundamentally misanthropic, meaning people want to be as far away from each other as possible. In terms of logic, this already isn't convincing, because the conclusion clearly doesn't follow from the premise. However, from the context around his statement, there were implied bridges that we can look at. So let's give this another pass. Premise 1. In a post-COVID survey, a majority of respondents said they did not want to return to the office because of their colleagues. So the hidden bridge, number 1, was that not wanting to return to the office because of colleagues meant wanting distance from people. Now, the hidden bridge 2 is that wanting distance from people in that situation means a core species-level human motivation. Conclusion. Therefore, human nature is fundamentally misanthropic. People want to stay away from each other. Now, it should be apparent that even with these additional bridges, I don't want to be in this workplace with these colleagues under these conditions is not equivalent to I want distance from all human beings. This is swapping a contextual preference for a global disposition. It is a false universalization, taking a partial observation and stretching it to cosmic size. This is the equivalent of saying, most people at work love sushi, therefore the human soul craves raw fish. And Dr. Solo, he basically inflates a post-pandemic workplace sentiment into a species-wide ontology. And alongside being a false universalization, there's equivocation and ecological fallacy in there too, just for bad measure. Arguably, this is a faux terminus paralogism, because the survey numbers give Dr. Solo's argument the shape of proof, while he makes the classic shutdown maneuver. The data have spoken. The case is closed. And if it looked like logic to you, it was a faux terminus paralogism. If it looked as logically flawed as it truly was, then it's just a bog-average faux terminus. In either case, Dr. Solo's reasoning tries to close inquiry by pretending that the evidence already covers all possible cases, that nothing new can be learned because the conclusion has swallowed the world. Lest we forget, dear listeners, whatever flavour of faux terminus is used, power and or dogma are in play. Someone doesn't want you thinking further. Someone doesn't want you asking questions. Now, Joe Dispenza makes a buck when we stop inquiring, and Dr. Solo gets to look like an intellectual authority. Now, next episode, we're going to look more at who else profits, from self-improvement to the health and even medical industries. But for now, here is your crib sheet of unreason. This is 4 quick questions to spot which flavour of faux terminus has just killed the vibe. Question 1. Am I suddenly the focus now? If that's the case, you're dealing with a school disco bully kind of faux terminus. Question 2. Is some third party being invoked, like tradition, authority, most people, or the process? Then you're dealing with a line-dancing bureaucrat who's entered the room. Question 3. Did I feel an odd sense of confusion about what this has to do with anything? In that case, you've been thwarted by a freestyle failure, like a non sequitur, a red herring, straw man, circularity, and so on. Question 4. Is this ending dressed up like a seminar paper with cobbled together jargon or I'm a famous expert bravado? If so, then it's a paralogism. Bullies win by insults, bureaucrats by ritual, freestylers by distraction, and paralogisms by costume. And there is one more thing to note. For those of you for whom hope dies last, here is how to keep the conversation alive when you've been dealt a faux terminus. Because some faux termini don't come from dickheads. Some of them actually come from decent people who've been sold the idea that performance looks like confidence. So what you can do in those cases is try asking, what evidence would change your mind? If the answer is nothing, then you are officially not in reason land. You're in faith land, where the high priests wear PhDs and the schoolyard bullies laugh at their own jokes and the marketeers cash in on all of it. So, some closing reflections. If you have made it this far, I should probably send you a certificate in the post or something, because seriously, most people do not voluntarily wade through logic, Latin, and the taxonomy of dickhead arguments in their free time. So respect. You have earned your faux terminus spotter badge, because that is the key takeaway here, with the rest being justification for it. So you don't need to memorize every term or diagram or philosopher I've mentioned. You just need to recognize the performance, to know when someone's shutting down inquiry instead of engaging in it. You just need to notice when you've been served a conversational stop sign and to call it what it is, a faux terminus. And that's the whole utility of the concept. Once you can spot that move, you are not, in fact, shut down. You are not beaten in a game that you didn't even sign up for. When you can spot a faux terminus, you get to choose how you respond. You can name it, laugh at it, refuse to part with your hard-earned cash or believe that you are flawed or lesser, or ask the only question that ever really reopens inquiry. What evidence would change your mind? And when the answer is nothing, you're in the land of unreason. And here's the thing, the faux terminus isn't just a logic problem, it's a relational one. A faux terminus says, I don't want to understand, I want to win. And when logic lookalikes are used to do that, meaning the faux terminus paralogism, the alienation doubles. Reason becomes a weapon, and curiosity starts to feel naive or even shameful. And that is how unreason works under capitalism. The appearance of rationality is monetized. Certainty sells, so we learn to perform it. In mimicking certainty, we lose the ability to think and to connect. So when I talk about the faux terminus and faux terminus paralogism, I'm not just naming bad arguments. I'm naming the machinery that rewards them. The rational man who crushes debate, the influencer who settles complexity in 30 seconds, or the CEO who ends discussion with a strategic decision. Different stages, same applause line, finality. Now, episode 14 showed how curiosity is the motor of reason. The faux terminus is the cork jammed in that engine. The faux terminus paralogism is the cork with a certificate of authenticity. But the cure remains the same. Keep asking questions. Not to perform intelligence, right? But to stay in relation to the world, to others, and to the possibility that we might still be wrong. Because every time inquiry is killed, connection dies with it. And when curiosity walks back on stage, life starts again. Now, next episode is going to be the third and final part of this Dogma mini-series. And we're going to go into health, beauty, medicine, and wellness, the industries where Dogma thrives by selling us the tools of our own isolation whilst claiming they will fix our woes. We're going to unpack how perfectionism, control, and competition are propped up by pseudoscience, popularism, and the fear of being alone. And we're going to look at how our bodies and minds become the canvas on which unreason is acted out, and who ultimately profits from our so-called self-improvement. I hope to see you then, and thanks for listening. Bye.